Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. Everything you see here is for sale. We are waking up with watches. Purchase and pricing questions, direct them to tmosso at thewatchbox.com, whether you want to buy, trade, or sell. And if you want to sell, we are always looking to build inventory, one watch or an entire collection, no upper limit on cash wired. Again, to sell, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's get started with a big piece. Certainly by Reverso standards, 2021 is a big year, 90 years to be specific, but back in 2001, Jaeger-LeCoultre had planned to launch the 70th anniversary Reverso. Well, it proved to be so complex an undertaking that they wound up releasing the watch a year late, but it was worth the wait. This is formally the 70th, the 70th anniversary Reverso, in the original version of the XGT case, 12 millimeters thick, 46.5 millimeters lug to lug, and 29.2 millimeters across. The watch is actually more complex than it appears at first glance, because while there is an awful lot of apparatus on the dial side, and we'll talk about it, on the reverse side, you get something even more spectacular. A solid rose gold movement. That's right, 18-karat rose gold bridges and plates, FP Journe style, but 2 years before FP Journe started making solid gold movements. Twin mainspring barrels, an 8-day rated power reserve. Reality is closer to 10. And as you can see, immaculately hand-finished and detailed. You still have the fascinating, beguiling, and unique Reverso case that flips on its chassis, which you can see is here individually numbered out of 500. On the dial side, we have an 8-day power reserve indicator, a day and night indicator, small seconds, and then a double-digit date with a quick set function. Full deployant clasp in matching rose gold. Let's throw it on the wrist. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference. It actually wears quite easily. It's not broad across the wrist, and you can see that right here. While it looks massive, reality is that it's about as thin as a Rolex Daytona, which is to say you can easily wear it underneath the cuff. You can see it's not too broad from over the top, and when you view it down the barrel, I've got plenty of clearance on each side, so even if your wrist is 14 centimeters in circumference, you can wear this Reverso, and you will wear it with panache. Let's stay up market, and let's talk about a model that came out in 2018, and it was one of my favorite of the year. Though the 5205 was not new for 2018, this Dash 13 model was. As you can see, white gold with lovely scalloped and evacuated lug profiles and a concave bezel. The lines of this watch are surprisingly sinuous and complex. Now, you'll appreciate that on the dial side, Patek Philippe was out in front of the gradient dial trend with a fume fade from dark blue at its center to almost black navy style at its edge. The watch has metallic style chapter ring. Technically, it would be called a metallic sector dial, as you have 2 chapter rings in polished metal with large baton-style white gold indices that cross over them radially arrayed. It is a loomed dial. It is an annual calendar. You get a wonderful aperture-style annual calendar that's intuitive to read. You get a 24-hour dial coaxial with the moon phase, and the moon phase has an adjustment interval of 122 years. The annual calendar need be adjusted only once a year during the jump from February to March. Free-sprung, 6-position adjustment, Gyromax style balance, anti-magnetic silicon hairspring, automatic winding, caliber 324 with a 45-hour power reserve. Patek says it will run from the factory no worse than +2 seconds, -3 seconds per day. And in 40 millimeters and quite flat, this is a watch that wears well on any wrist in any attire. Sporty enough to be casual, but also formal enough that you can wear it black tie if you wish. This watch is an all-arounder. Now, if you want to get a little bit more formal and lower in profile, this is a model based on a platform that came out in 2012. This is the 5940G, and it's a perpetual calendar with a cushion profile. It's only 8.8 millimeters thick, 37 millimeters from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, not including the crown, and about 44.6 millimeters from lug to lug. This one uses the caliber 240 micro rotor, so it's not a center rotor. It still has features like the Gyromax style balance. Let's get a little bit closer and appreciate it in detail. You've got the free-sprung Gyromax style balance, 6-position adjustment, anti-magnetic silicon hairspring, and then you've got a micro rotor, 22 karat on ceramic rotor bearings. All of this adding up to a big open display case back that allows you to appreciate the quality of the finishing on every surface, right down to the screws and the locating posts. And of course, it's big and open because unlike a center rotor, a micro rotor lets you see the whole movement. It also makes the watch thinner. Throw it on the wrist and it looks larger than a 37. Though it's 37 across, it does have the wrist presence of a 42 in my opinion. But you can see, again, it's short across the wrist. It's not going to overlap either side of your wrist here, so I can wear this watch, honestly, even if my wrist were small, as 13.5 centimeters circumference, I'm still going to wear this one well, which is why I rate it as an exceptional unisex option. Now, being a perpetual calendar, you only need to adjust it once in the year 2100. Leap years, irregular length months, they're not a problem. You've got a moon phase, you've got a 24-hour subdial, and lovely white gold applique brigade style Arabic numerals with a polished dimple style minutes track. Let's go back in time. Let's go back in time to the 1960s and the first Omega in space. This model launched on the anniversary of the first Omega in space back in 2012. It's designed to evoke the CK2998 generation, so you have no crown guards, no shear guards for the pusher, minimal beveling. These are not the Lyre style lugs, and squared off end profiles, about 47 millimeters lug to lug. It's more compact than the 42 millimeter moon watches. It's 39.7 millimeters. You have alpha style hands at center and on the small seconds, so a little bit of a different look than a standard modern-day Moonwatch with an applique Omega logo, though it is still powered by a Moonwatch caliber. This is a numbered edition, not a limited edition, but each one is individually numbered. Caliber 1861 inside, cam, lateral clutch, manual wind, 48-hour power reserve, and of course that is a NASA-flown caliber, the 1861. It is still Lamagna 1873 based, so while this watch is perhaps a little bit more nostalgic than a modern Moonwatch, nevertheless it still has the beating heart of NASA's standard issue. Easy to wear, it's a little bit more compact than a full-size Moonwatch, so if you want a NASA-style Omega, but you can't quite wear the 42, this is right up your alley. But speaking of 42s, they don't come much more impressive than this. Launched back in 2015, who could have imagined? Officially, the Apollo XII anniversary piece, this watch, I must say, is probably the single most sought modern-day Speedmaster. Apollo 11 45th anniversary? Certainly, but everyone knows this as the Silver Snoopy too. You have a black and white comic-style dial. That's the color tone palette used, black and white, as Charles Schulz would have illustrated the Peanuts characters, which included Snoopy the Beagle. 14 seconds elapsed on the dial, the period during which retro rockets were fired, timed by the Omega Speedmaster to help the crippled Apollo 13 capsule regain Earth orbit. And of course, we have what could you do in 14 seconds to remind you of the time elapsed. Failure is not an option. That's actually a line Ed Harris, I believe, from the Apollo 13 movie. There is spectacular lume, and it starts with solid blocks of luminova, which actually have a black coating on their top, so you see that in relief. It's a spectacular watch with a ceramic tachymeter insert, a sapphire crystal, and on the reverse side, you have the image of Snoopy as drawn by Charles Schulz for NASA. Before Apollo 13, this was a general award given to meritorious service and products provided to NASA by suppliers, the Silver Snoopy Award, and of course, Schulz drew this image of Snoopy in a spacesuit specifically for the award. He never could have imagined how famous it would become. Now, the watch is one of 1,970, but you'd think there's only a handful on the market based on the current price of this watch. A lot to love, though. Snoopy here is sterling silver and hand engraved, so this is an extensively handmade caseback. We have a translucent blue enamel with metallic flakes below, so it is both enamel and engraved silver. Inside, once again, you have that same Moonwatch caliber, but a very different look. Let's take a look after dark and get a sense of Snoopy. This is a spectacular watch. You could see those three-dimensional blocks of lume used for the hour indices, the fully luminescent tachymeter, and of course Snoopy himself. Now, let's make a lateral step forward in time to 2020 and this absolutely monstrous, I mean, just emotionally manipulative, lust-worthy, unprecedented grained dial, eggshell dial, Panerai Luminor 1950 Destro, or left hand. This watch, the PAM 1075, an extraordinary 47mm stainless steel vintage inflected Luminor that includes a plexiglass crystal, 100-meter water resistance, 3-day power reserve, historically inspired left-hand style crown, and it even includes a time zone function so you can jump from time zone to time zone. It is a sandwich dial, which means you have a solid disc of ecru colored simulated patina lume, and then on top of that, this stencil in rusticated eggshell is inserted, so you have a three-dimensional dial with real luminescent depth at night. Turn it all over, You can see Panerai manufactured caliber 3000, full balance bridge with a free-sprung index for shock tolerance, 21.6 beat rate, and although it does feature its bridges broken up in half for easier service, it's designed to read as an old Rolex or Angelus pocket watch movement, as you would have seen in 1930s through 1950s Panerai combat watches. And of course, the watch water resistant and truly impressive in that you can just put it on a water resistant strap and take this one swimming. It's an all-arounder. It's your vintage inspired piece. If you've got the wrist for it, because it's a little bit warmer in tone than a standard Panerai, it could be your dress piece. And of course, it's a sports watch par excellence. Now, Panerai in 47 millimeters, it's designed to look large. It's not supposed to look proportional. So I think your wrist down to 15 centimeters circumference is going to wear this one well. There's going to be some lug overlap, but you're not going to feel it too acutely, as the watch seems more like a square than an elongated rectangle. Truly impressive looking stuff and lovely rose gold plated hands. This is one of Panerai's best in recent years. But let's say you want a no-holds-barred sports watch, a real tool watch, a utility watch that makes no excuses and needs none. Well, this is the Sinn 857 UTC Lufthansa. So a Lufthansa cargo watch, effectively celebrating Lufthansa's cargo service. A German watch in tribute to a German aviation outfit. And you can see these are individually numbered. They're also chock-a-block with Sinn technologies. Now, the watch is 11.9 millimeters thick as I measure it, and 43 millimeters in diameter. You get a system whereby the watch is actually filled with nitrogen, and then a copper sulfate capsule is inserted into the side to draw out any moisture that might intrude into the watch. The case is entirely tegimented, which means carbon diffused several micrometers into the metal. As a result, the surface hardness is between 1200 and 1500 Vickers. I've scratched up my own tegimented case using a key to demonstrate this to my friends. You could see not a mark left. I have literally tortured that watch using a key. This watch has the same material, and as you can see, it features the same tegimented steel, almost completely indelible. The watch includes a captive bezel, and you can see it has little screws holding it in place so it can't accidentally be snapped off by mechanical violence. You can also see SUG between the lugs, Sinn making its own cases. The watch is robustly anti-magnetic, shock resistant, and it is water resistant down to 200 meters or 20 bar. You can see that the timepiece also includes a second time zone with a little Lufthansa cargo plane acting as your second time zone indicator. Now, the watch is remarkably versatile, and I love the fact that because it's an ETA 2893 in top condition inside, you get both a 24-hour quick-set system and a date quick-set system. A lot of GMT-style watches do not have a conventional quick-set date. The watch also has a wonderfully sharp indexing for its bidirectional style pilot's bezel. A loom shot for this one, you better believe it. As you can see, an absolute torch. Also, it's resistant and functional to temperatures as low as negative 45 degrees Celsius and as high as 80 degrees Celsius, at which point, either way, you're dead. Luxury and sports come together in the second generation Vacheron Constantin overseas chronograph, full rose gold here with a lovely nickel anthracite dial. This is a 42.5 millimeter anti-magnetic 150 meter water resistant sports watch that wears beautifully on a smaller wrist because, and this is special about the second generation watch, you won't find it on the third generation. The bracelet pulls straight down. It doesn't fight out and flare. It doesn't have virtual span across the wrist. It pulls straight down. So if you've got a smaller wrist like I do, it fits just like a glove, beautifully contouring to a smaller wrist. The watch is also thin at only about 12.4 millimeters thick, so it's as thin as a Rolex Daytona in spite of being more anti-magnetic and more water resistant. Now you can see how beautifully it's finished. Every individual link in the bracelet alternately satinated and polished, and that by hand. And the bracelet feels incredible. The tolerances, the solidity, the smoothness, the souplesse. Take a look at the side. Every single individual link on both sides of this bracelet removable, so you will find the correct size. And you can see that half links have been built into the bracelet construction, so you will be able to finely size this bracelet as well. The case, as with the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, extensively hand finished to achieve the satination and polish. And you can see that Maltese cross style bezel, a lovely Maltese cross inspired knurling on the screw downs as well as the crown, 150 meter water resistant nickel anthracite dial. Note that it has a big eye style dial with the minutes register made larger for easier access, and the late and lamented double-digit date. Everyone misses this feature. It's not present on Generation 3. It was on Generation 1 and 2. And on the reverse side, the image of the Italian naval training vessel Amerigo Vespucci. Inside, Frederic Piguet 1185, integrated automatic 40-hour power reserve, 5-position adjusted, hand-finished, vertical clutch and column wheel chronograph mechanism. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of finish on this case. There's a solid piece of iron internally that acts as a magnetic shield for this watch, giving it 25,000 ampere per meter of shielding. Remember, 4,800 ampere per meter is the ISO 764 definition of an anti-magnetic watch, and this is several times that. Let's talk about spectacular things in rose gold. Let's talk about a model launched in 2018 based on the 2010 to present second generation Lange und Söhne 1815 flyback chronograph with flyback action, manual wind 60-hour power reserve, a 39.5mm case that, unlike the datograph, is slim, but because the difference between this watch and the Dato mechanically is all on the dial side of the movement, the reverse side of the case, and this is caliber 9515, exactly the same. Lateral clutch, column wheel, abundant black polish, finished steel, finished brass. You can see there's an abundance of German silver, the bridges and the plates in German silver with glasuta stripes across their top. German silver is a nickel copper zinc alloy with the copper giving it that golden hue. Note both black polished and fired blue screws and mirrored anglage on the few bridges. You can see that rounded mirrored anglage on the edge. I really need to learn the German word for anglage. Freehand engraved, balanced cock, no two exactly alike, overcoil hairspring, 5-position adjustment. It does have an enormous balance, speeding away at 18,000 vibrations per hour, and it does include hacking or stop seconds. The pusher feel on a caliber 951 or 952 is best in the world, and because this is Lange, the dial itself is made of sterling silver and then galvanized this silver white color. It has a lovely pulsation scale outboard for reading the pulse of a patient and fired blue alpha style hands. Again, because it is more compact in profile than a datograph, it wears more compact and more compatible with a cuff on the wrist. Visually, these watches are identical on the case back. The difference is that this watch doesn't have a date or a power reserve, and this watch also has a lot less thickness. It's not as fat as the datograph. Some might even say it has a better balanced dial. Now, Lange makes about 5,000 watches a year, but when was the last time you saw a Parmigiani anywhere? These watches, built by a company that frankly doesn't need the money because it makes movements for other companies while enjoying the patronage of a Swiss pharmaceutical empire, Parmigiani Fleurier is able to do whatever Michel Parmigiani wants to do. And what he wants to do is build beautiful, if unconventional, watches in the most traditional fashion. This is the Toric Perpetual Calendar Retrograde, and as you can see, uses the signature toric case shape, compressed Greek columns with tiered striations. That's what this coining is supposed to evoke. You can see it's made old school with the lugs inserted into slots in the case and then welded on with all evidence of the joint removed to create that sharp break between case and lug. This is incredibly laborious and difficult to do. The dial features a combination of satin metallic brushing that is circumferential around the retrograde date scale, and then we have a guilloche center with an unusual pattern specific to this model. We do have center seconds, we do have stop seconds, we do have a perpetual calendar with a retrograde date. You have aperture style day and month, a 122-year moon phase, so you need not adjust it for another 122 years after setting, and then there is a small leap year phase indicator up at the top. Everything is immaculately hand finished. There's a small true sapphire inside the crown, a little cabochon, and then we have manufactured caliber PF332 automatic winding twin barrel 50 to 55 hour power reserve, and as you can see, it features high horology finish from the Côte de Genève to the mirrored anglage to the engine turning on the rotor, and the watch of course features a matched buckle that has that same coining profile. The watch, at only 11.5 millimeters thick, is super slim on the wrist, and as a perpetual calendar, you don't need to worry about leap years or irregular length months. One of the most underrated high horology manufacturers in the world, Parmigiani Fleurier, able to make every part of the watch, the hands, the dials, the movements, the cases, the clasps, everything built by the Parmigiani family of companies. This watch has true integrity. Let's talk about sports watches for a little bit, because I've got quite a few of them here, and quite a few of them come from famous lines. Launched in 2019, this was partly the antidote to the Code 1159 debacle. AP realized that it was taking a chance with those watches, and I have to think they realized they had a problem with the dials of the automatics and the chronographs before they even launched. Fortunately, they had a bunch of new Royal Oaks ready to go, so all is forgiven. This is the 15500 ST. Changes are obvious compared to the 15400. Most notably, there's just less written on the dial. We don't need to know the watch is automatic. We've already bought it. And as you can see, there's some changes to the hands and the indices, but for the most part, it is a unadorned dial. The index and the date at 3 o'clock change a little bit. It has a new movement. So aside from the restyled dial here in anthracite gray and cut on a pantograph lathe, old school fashion at AP. We also have the new caliber 4302. The big change compared to the previous 3120 is that this now has a 28.8 beat rate, so it doesn't have the 21.6 beat rate, and in spite of being a higher rate and thus theoretically more accurate and shock resistant, the watch also has a 70-hour power reserve, unlike the previous watch's 60, so that gets upgraded too. It's also a bigger movement. You can see how it better fills the case back. This watch with a screw-down crown and 50 meters water resistant is swimmable on the surface, so you can absolutely consider this an all-the-time watch. It is a big watch, though. While it fits easily underneath the cuff at under 10 millimeters thick, I recommend that you consider this watch for practical purposes more like a 43 round watch and not wear it on a wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference. Of course, AP since 2012 making its own dials in-house for the Royal Oaks. They used to be made by Frère. Now they're made by AP, still cut on a pantograph. This is the Grande Tapisserie. The Mega on the offshore is actually a piece of stamped metal, but this is still cut on a pantograph lathe. The watch is handsome, the watch is versatile, the watch is impressive, but if we up the ante, we bring in the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph. Now we're operating at a different level. The blue dial, which is rather difficult to galvanize, has been lately retained mostly for AP boutiques. You have a contrasting silver on blue dial, and this is the post-2017 anniversary dial, as it's known, that debuted on the 20th anniversary of the Royal Oak Chronograph at SIHH. So you have the smaller register for constant seconds and larger registers for chronograph hours and minutes. Here too, we have a 50-meter water resistance, though another change for 2017 was the use of a non-screw-down pusher for the chronograph, so you no longer need to screw them in or out. They still feature shoulders, but they're always accessible now, and it doesn't have any penalty regarding water resistance. Inside, we have the same movement that you heard about on the overseas a moment ago. Frédéric Piguet 1185. Technical specifications are identical, and as with the 15500, it takes about 9 to 11 hours to finish this bracelet, just the bracelet by hand, and that's before we count the clasp, the case, and the bezel, all of which are immaculately hand finished for sharpness and definition. This watch is handmade inside and out. It wears identically to the 15500, so if you can wear that, you can wear this, and vice versa. It's a timepiece that I recommend you consider a 43 millimeter round watch for practical purposes, but it's still quite thin at 10.9 millimeters thick for the chronograph. All right, let's say you want to go a little bit deeper. No more 50-meter watches, 300 meters. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms bathyscaphe, launched at Bosworld 2013. It is a more historically inflected 50 Fathoms that's also a little bit more wearable than the reference 5015. So this is reference 5000. It is 43 millimeters instead of 45, and it's 13.5 millimeters thick instead of about 15 for the standard 5015. This one is in stainless steel. There are a couple of different versions. This one's going to be the most democratic and I think durable in practice. Ceramic, of course, a wonderful material, but it can fracture, it can crack. Steel will not. The watch is handsome and evocative, designed to remind us of a previous era of 50 Fathoms construction when the styles and the customers from small to large, military to civilian, were all over the place. And this watch combines a lot of the best features of the late 50s and early 60s with its straight and sheer case band, its minimally beveled lugs, its squared off lug profiles, and its big crown without crown guards. Let's do a loom shot. As you can see, no shortage of loom here. We have those baton hands with small syringe-like extensions, and then the party's on the case back, where you're getting the same movement you get in the 5015, which is to say one of the best in the business. Now you can see it is exhaustively hand-finished. The bevels in particular are mirrored and a mile wide. You can appreciate them without a loop. Blancpain had good taste to use multiple finishes on the gold winding mass. You can see there is a frosted grain at the center. There is satin finish over the raised plinth around the edge of the rotor, as well as over the characters of the Blancpain name and logo. And then there's a mirrored anglage on the edge that's as broad and brilliant as the anglage on the bridges. You can see that Blancpain used a satin graining across the bridges instead of Côte de Genève, and I actually like that. 3 barrels, 6 position adjustment, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, 5 days of power reserve, stop seconds, and a quick set date. You can see all of the screw heads have been black polished with their slots and their circumference chamfered, and there's really no penalty for all of this. The watch is still a tough thing. It is still very shock tolerant. Mark Hayek once said that he took the original 13 RO movement, which was the manual precursor of this watch, mountain biking, and it only lost a second. So this is a serious high horology movement in terms of finish and spec, but it is also very tough as a sports watch caliber. This is a sporty watch, but not a sports watch. Launched in 2010, this was the first series production Ulysse Nardin Freak to include a tourbillon. It is the Freak Diavolo, a timepiece 45 millimeters in white gold. It's everything the Freak has been since 2001, but rather than simply being a carousel, which is like a tourbillon, but not exactly the same and moves far more slowly, this watch combines the 60-minute carousel, so you've got this baguette movement, unlock the movement. I'll show you how you do that. You pull up the tab. You can see how the carousel still rotates around the dial, and the carousel is still one and the same as the drivetrain and the minute hand, but now we have a flying tourbillon that makes 1 circuit every minute. So you still have the carousel, but you get to enjoy the visible pirouette speed of a tourbillon with no upper bridge to block, so it's a flying tourbillon, and an unlubricated silicone escapement with an anti-magnetic silicone hairspring made in-house by Ulysse Nardin. Through their subsidiary Sigitech, they make their own silicone. That is not something other companies short of Patek, Rolex, and Swatch can say. There is a sapphire scale for reading the seconds, and then we have a free-sprung architecture for shock tolerance. And note that the jewels here are clear sapphires rather than synthetic rubies, which better matches the techno-industrial look of a Ulysse Nardin movement. It is loomed, it is a manual wind, and on the reverse side you can see how you manually wind it. It's a watch that you wind by turning the case back, and because this watch uses, yes, a silicone escapement, but a conventional Swiss lever, you actually get a little bit more power reserve than a standard Freak. So 7 days becomes almost 8 days of power reserve. And the watch is large. I'm not going to lie about that, especially with a little bit of fight and flair to the strap. I'd recommend you have a big wrist, no smaller certainly than mine. My wrist is 16 centimeters circumference. The watch is not thick. It's actually just about 12 millimeters thick. So that's not thick. That's thin. That's, again, that's pretty close to a Rolex GMT in terms of thickness. So you can wear it under a cuff, but you need a big wrist to make it work. It's beautifully made inside and out, and as you can see, it features a hand-polished case with an individual numbered plaque on the flank to remind you this is how Ulysse Nardin numbered its watches back in the era of marine chronometers, an era in which Ulysse Nardin was dominant in the navigation clock marketplace. All right, FP Journe. We talk a lot about FP Journe, and while I'm not necessarily a fanboy, when it comes to the Black Label series, I'm a believer. This is one of the best ways to get into FP Journe. An automatic wind, a friendly everyday complication, the Goldilocks just right 40 millimeter case, and it is the Constantin Perpetual Black Label, a timepiece that originally launched in 2015. Here you see it with the option clover dial. There are 2 different dials. One has this steel polished inner bezel, the other does not. This is the more traditional look, and it is Black Label, which means not only do you get an exclusive black dial and platinum case, but this Black Label series is only available through FP Journe boutiques and espaces, and then only to prior purchasers of new FP Journe watches. Furthermore, only 2 examples of any given model can be made Black Label per year. Lots to love. A perpetual calendar system that you can set entirely without tools, no little adjuster dimples or warts on the case flank. Everything is done either through the crown or through a fold-out hideaway trigger, and I don't quite have the nails to highlight this. Let me see, maybe my pinky nail can pull it out. There you go. I do manicures for these shows, the things I do for you guys, and that's how you actually change the month. But when you don't need it, it folds in flush and disappears. Everything else can be quick set through the crown. There's a 120-hour power reserve. That is the chronometric power reserve, as octa-automatic caliber 1300 will in fact run for almost 7 days. Its power reserve to exhaustion is 160 hours. Now, as you can see, the bridges and the plates are 18-karat rose gold. The rotor, which is cut guilloche style on a rose lathe, the rotor is 22-karat gold. 5-position adjustment, oversized balance for stability, free sprung for durability and precise setting. And again, with a perpetual calendar system, you can deal with irregular length months and leap years. Just keep wearing the watch and it becomes set it and forget it. One of the most handsome versions of one of FP Journe's most charming and practical high complications. This watch that I'm about to show you is not big on complication, but it's high on style. And frankly, the name on the dial needs no introduction. Originally launched in 2013, this is the 25-piece limited edition Kari Voutilainen V8R. I'm not going to go full francophone here. I'm going to call it the V8R, but it was the second version of his 28 system, launched in 2011. Here, he adds two important features: a power reserve indicator and hacking seconds. Those were not present on the 2011 28. Now, you can see the watch in rose gold is typically Voutilainen in design, which is to say it is exhaustively detailed and visually distinctive. You have those welded-on lug profiles, which are extraordinarily difficult to achieve given the tolerances. It is a 39mm watch that's about 11.6mm thick, a lovely and lustrous black dial. You can see the hands themselves are a combination of blued steel and then rose gold, and they are built up from components into the assembly as you see here. So even the hands are hand finished, thoughtfully detailed, and minutely constructed by a watchmaker's dexterous fingers. We do have the power reserve indicator. While the watch, in theory, in its standard form, is able to run for 65 hours, here Kari Voutilainen has installed a stopworks, so it will run for 49 hours, but it will not run once it's outside its optimal power reserve. That's there to remind you to wind the watch and keep it in chronometer grade timekeeping. Once again, you do have that hacking or stop seconds function and the power reserve, so two refinements not found in the original watch. We have applique rose gold stick indices and tri-Arabic numerals, and on the reverse side, the finish for which Kari Voutilainen is rightly famous. Now, the movement features a double direct impulse escapement, so there's no Swiss lever here, as with the FP Journe natural escapement and a similar mechanism used by Laurent Fleurier. The Swiss lever is gone, and these two escape wheels, as with the Breguet natural escapement of 1802, each one only impulses the balance in its direction of travel back and forth to minimize friction, improve chronometry and consistency, and extend power reserve. Now, you have a free-sprung index for shock tolerance, 6-position adjustment, a handmade overcoil hairspring, so it will keep even time in any physical position. As you can see, the entire balance bridge has been black polished, as are all of the screws. Every screw features a chamfered slot and circumference, and you can see that the mirrored anglage on the edge of this bridge is immaculate, but so is the work on the edge of the standard bridges. You can see a mile wide. You don't need a loop to appreciate this rounded beveling, and there are plenty of interior angles on this movement where two bevels meet in a sharp cleft line. All of it best in the industry. AHCI watchmaking at its finest, and remarkably accessible, as you really don't need a loop to appreciate this lovely rose gold plated frosted movement. As good gets, and graceful on any wrist. I consider it to be a unisex option because it's not too big, but nor is it petite. This is a watch that simply has gravitas and appeals in any language on any wrist size. Reach out to me, guys, if you love this Kari Voutilainen V8R. tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.